The news of a ceasefire came way past their bedtime. But this was a time to celebrate. Lebanese families, displaced by war, danced with joy. Come morning, many were already on the road heading home. More than 1 million Lebanese people have been displaced and lived in terror for months. Guess which road is heading south?
Going home is the nicest feeling. We're returning with our heads held high. We're returning with dignity.
Thank God. It feels great. Thank God for everyone's safety. I hope Lebanon always stays safe.
But some of the places they are returning to are still occupied by Israeli forces, who have 60 days to leave. And as people flooded back, Israel warned residents not to return to the border area. The Israeli army implemented a curfew for those moving south of the Litani River, with the IDF saying they had arrested 4 Hezbollah militants. A pause in fighting, but a fragile peace. The Lebanese army also began deploying to the area today in accordance with the ceasefire agreement. Their role with UN peacekeepers is to monitor the territory and ensure Hezbollah does not return. Both sides are portraying this as a victory. Supporters of Hezbollah chanted the name of their former leader, Hassan Nasrallah, killed by Israel in September, and many waved the yellow and green flag of the militant group. It is that support and the continued presence of Hezbollah in Lebanon which worries Israelis displaced by the fighting. Many of them, like Amichai, fear this is not the win that Benjamin Netanyahu boasted about last night and are fearful of returning home.
A ceasefire is a big nonsense in my opinion, because nothing has changed. Tomorrow Hezbollah will go through the tunnels that haven't been found yet, and they will reach us and take us whole.
To attempt to ease their fear and limit their anger, the Israeli government has emphasized that if Hezbollah violates the new agreement, they will not hesitate in striking back inside Lebanese territory. So could we see history repeat itself? The last ceasefire occurred in 2006, following a month-long conflict during which 150 Israelis and 1,000 Lebanese were killed. The terms of that deal, UN Resolution 1701, are the basis of the present ceasefire. But back then, both sides accused the other of violating the agreement. Lebanon said Israeli jets continued to enter their airspace, while Israel said Hezbollah had rearmed and moved military infrastructure south of the Litani River. And so many today, both north and south of the border, wonder how long this present calm will last. In Lebanon, the rebuild begins. This is a nation that was already in economic freefall and beset with corruption, now ravaged by a conflict that has left cities pockmarked with rubble and the south leveled by Israeli airstrikes.
From 2006 to 2024, every 10, 15 years there's a war. There are people who built homes and made investments in the south. This is the second time we suffer such damage.
Lebanon's Prime Minister said, enough wars, tragedies and disasters. Many will echo that wish across this region, but fear that for far too long now, such devastation has become synonymous with this land.
Well, joining me from Beirut is the Lebanese-Australian journalist Rania Abu Zaid. Rania, thousands returning home. What are they telling you about the scale of devastation, what they're facing there?
Yes, as you saw from that report, the Lebanese did not wait long at all to head back to their towns and villages, not only in the south, but also in Baalbek and in the Bekaa Valley. The ceasefire took effect at dawn, and very soon after that, there were traffic jams on all of the southbound routes as people headed home or to whatever remained of their homes. Certainly, the destruction is widespread. There was a report recently that said that up to 100,000 homes have been damaged or destroyed. This war killed more than 3,700 Lebanese. It wounded more than 15,000. So the devastation is vast, but so too is the ability and the desire of Lebanese to return home and to rebuild their lives.
And are they worried about that rebuilding, given the sort of prospect of new outbreaks of violence loom heavily, but also how they're going to rebuild, what help they will have to rebuild?
Well, that's the key question. Now, Hezbollah's leaders have said that they will help rebuild. They will help foot the bill for the rebuilding. But, this is not like 2006. Where's the money going to come from? The country has been mired in a devastating economic collapse since 2019, actually, and it is still feeling the after effects of that collapse in 2019. Certainly, geopolitically, the Gulf states are not as friendly. Many of the Gulf states are not as friendly to Lebanon as they were in 2006, and Iran is also sanctioned and has its own economic woes to contend with. So that's the big question about where the money is going to come from.
And over it all, this nervousness hangs about how long this ceasefire will hold. What are your reflections on that?
Well, it's a very fragile truce, and the potential spoilers are many on both sides of the border. You heard in that report that Netanyahu says that he thinks that Israel reserves the right to strike Lebanese territory if it thinks that Hezbollah is rearming or that its fighters are moving south of the Litani River. Now, these are very difficult things to verify, given that Hezbollah's fighters are clandestine, and its arming, its rearming is also sort of not. It's not that you don't see Hezbollah fighters in these areas. Lebanon fears that Israel may try and exploit that and violate Lebanese sovereignty. So it's a very fragile truce at the moment. So the Lebanese are certainly taking it one day at a time.
And is there a lot of nervousness that Hezbollah will breach its side of the deal?
Well, so far, its officials are welcoming this pause, this cessation of hostilities. They view it as a victory. They have said that they have, absorbed and endured devastating blows that Israel has unleashed on the group. So devastating that the former Secretary General Said Hassan Nasrallah himself described these blows as unprecedented and painful before he himself was assassinated a month ago. But Hezbollah's officials are presenting this as a victory because Hezbollah was not destroyed. It remained steadfast. It prevented Israeli soldiers from occupying and creating a new occupation zone in the south. And it says that it will help rebuild after this devastation.
Rania Abizaid, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, President Biden says his administration will immediately try to secure a truce in Gaza, declaring he will make a push with regional powers to agree a deal which includes the release of all the hostages and the removal of Hamas from power. But is there any likelihood of achieving that? Jonathan Rugman reports.
It's been a year since a brief truce in Gaza. In the words of President Biden, its people have been through hell, with over 44,000 Palestinians reported killed, most of them women and children. So, in the winter of his presidency, a final push for a ceasefire to follow that agreed over Lebanon. And Mr. Biden blames the lack of one on Hamas.
And so now Hamas has a choice to make. Their only way out is to release the hostages, including American citizens, which they hold. In the process, bring an end to the fighting, which would make possible a surge of humanitarian relief.
But these Israelis protesting in Tel Aviv last night blame their own prime minister. They want a deal to release somewhere between 50 and 100 hostages still thought to be alive inside Gaza. And they claim Benjamin Netanyahu won't compromise with Hamas in case his coalition government then collapses. Last night, Israel's Prime Minister talked about releasing the hostages, but not about a possible ceasefire. His political allies can barely stomach yesterday's truce with Hezbollah, and they want Hamas completely defeated before any hostage deal. But despite Gaza's growing humanitarian crisis, this crowd is waiting for bread and the yearning of Palestinians for peace. Hamas may have little incentive to stop fighting if the alternative, a ceasefire, means giving up power. So perhaps it's no wonder Keir Starmer and others are cautious about any optimism over Gaza.
We must seize this opportunity to build trust, de-escalate tensions and push for a wider ceasefire.
Those against?
At the UN Security Council last week, the Americans themselves voted alone against a resolution demanding a ceasefire, claiming that it suggested that a hostage release might not happen until after the truce. It was the fourth time the US had sided with Israel in this chamber. And Mr. Biden has given Israel pretty much all it's asked for in military as well as diplomatic support. In the meantime, many in Gaza feel forgotten, fearing that a ceasefire in Lebanon will enable the Israelis to escalate their bombardment here.